good afternoon and welcome. We're very honored to see so many of our Lyceum members and friends gathered here today, and most privileged to be able to host the book launch of Costa's new book, which sounds so very exciting, and I know you're going to hear more about it after lunch. It's ably titled Matriarchs, Meze, and the Evil Eye. And I think every one of those words resonates with anyone that with any kind of Greek dimension or family heritage. I'm Anthea Fasoulakis. I'm the president of the Lyceum. And I just want to give you briefly an introduction on what we do and who we are. So as the Lyceum, we are entrusted with the promotion, the preservation and the propagation of Greek culture in South Africa. In terms of promotion, and this is where I address Costa, essentially, other than promoting Greek culture and education to all Hellenes in South Africa, we also entrusted with promoting fellow Hellenes who are South Africans and promoting anybody that finds himself in a cultural, artistic, or any other space. Costa, this is precisely, I think, what your books are doing. They're showcasing contemporary Greek culture in the South African context. Bravo. So we have a lot to look forward to with Matriarchs, Meze, and the Evil Eye, because I have no doubt that there's not a single one of us that has not had to deal with multi-generational dynamic in a Greek household kitchen. Think about it. I mean, every one of us has. With regard to the preservation of Greek culture, we have under our custodianship the Matriarchs Hellenic Archive, which is sorely underfunded. It's a repository of photographs, articles, jewelry, a priceless costume collection that has absolutely no funding. So your 100 Rand donation today, thank you for that. And there were some of you that were very generous, and I have to actually mention Joanne Lascaridis. No, I'm grateful. We are absolutely that you gave a little more, and every cent counts at the moment. In fact, we've just also received a bequest from a late committee member, Arjin Pilavachi, who left us a bequest in her will, and particularly for the costumes, which are in sore need of attention. But I'm not going to keep you much longer because I know you're eating. I just want to say a few thank yous. Firstly, to Costa Ayiotis for your energy in creating these books and for the promotion of South African Greek culture, which is unique, and thank you for that. Then to Katy Katopodis for your time today, and just to know that we're so proud of you as Greeks. You've really made us all proud, and thank you for coming. Stand up. No, you'll see her later. She's here. Dina Suris, who heads up the cultural portfolio on the Lyceum Committee, for all your efforts today. It was absolutely streamlined and perfect, and thank you for doing this. And finally, just a personal one, I just want to thank my son Anthony Leonsons, who's in Cape Town, for the artwork, for the flyer and the menus and the program. That's all from me. I'm going to hand over to Dina just before the book launch, and enjoy your lunch, and thank you all of you for coming.
I am delighted to welcome Katy Katopodis and Costa Ayiotis. Neither Katy nor Costa really need much of an introduction. Both are exceptionally talented wordsmiths, eloquent speakers, and successful writers who have published autobiographical works. In fact, I suspect most of you here today have already read these two books. And if you haven't, do hunt them down. You're going to enjoy them so much. Katy has had and continues to have a phenomenally successful career in the world of media, having been at the helm of some of the largest radio and TV newsrooms in South Africa. I think we all remember her days. I just remember the thrill of hearing Katy speak on 702. I was so proud to have this young Greek woman on radio. And then she so quickly progressed up the ranks. Eyewitness News, I think the Oscar Pistorius story, TV, Newsroom Africa. It's been amazing. Katy wears many hats. She is currently editor-in-chief at Kaya FM, as well as co-CEO at the Mega Media Group. And she has other roles that she plays too, on various committees, ethics committees, etc. Over the years, she has won numerous awards, her latest being as recently as just a year ago, in 2023, when she received the Woman in Media Award. Costa, on the other hand, has been, what I would say, rather a brave risk taker for much of his life. He left the predictable security of a career as a lawyer to join the diplomatic corps, where he came to hold a prestigious position representing South Africa at the United Nations. But, as we all know from Costa's hilarious book, he left this career to pursue his dream of owning a big, fat Greek taverna. I think this resonates with most of us here because all good Greek homes know about Greek food and the love of food. But this wasn't all. Costa successfully sold that business and today is pursuing another of his dreams. He is a successful, full-time writer, having just published his second book, and I understand there is a third one in the running. No mean feat in a highly competitive arena, where most writers do not actually end up getting published. Katy and Costa, we are so proud of both of you and of your achievements. It is truly a delight to welcome you both here today. And without much ado, I think we're all so looking forward to hearing the two of you in conversation.
So it's been a very long time since I picked up a book and was completely engrossed. And I must tell you from the outset, if you haven't read it, please get yourself a copy and read it. This is wonderful. It's endearing, it's warm, and I'm going to read just a little bit, just to entice you, just a little. Three women raised me. We all lived together under one roof. My mother Victoria, my grandmother Yaya Kalyopi, and Aunt Mary, who was also Manona or godmother. We shared a home that had a large tree-lined garden and a spacious sit-in kitchen. Yaya Kalyopi had moved in with my parents before I was born, shortly after their wedding in the large provincial town of Minya in Upper Egypt. My father Stelio made the decision. My mother didn't really have a say in the matter, but at least my father was upfront with her about what she was getting herself into. And so begins a beautiful, beautiful story that is filled with such a rich tapestry. And my other very favorite bit, and I'd like to read for our audience here, is a part where Costa describes just sitting with his yaya. Here, let me get it. Some of my happiest boyhood memories were moments spent with my yaya in her kitchen. I would sit at the table for hours and watch her roll filo pastry on the floured surface of our kitchen table. Leaning forward, I would press my knees into a padded vinyl chair with my elbows propping up my face. The house would be peaceful and quiet, except for the occasional passing jet. He goes on to say, I love coming home to your cooking, Yaya. I'd tell her, making her glow with pleasure and pride. I'm so lucky to have you as my Yaya. The other boys are lucky if they get Marmite sandwiches when they get home from school. Marmite? What is Marmite? Said Yaya. Bah, that's not food.
Yeah, so Yaya was from Crete, born in Sitia and went to Egypt as a young girl. And you know, she was from that generation, matriarch, who she stood in the kitchen and she got vicarious pleasure and joy watching me and my father eat. I mean, Nonna was there, my mother was there, the Holy Trinity, the chaos, the Trinity of chaos, the three wonderful, strong matriarchs in this kitchen. And I was privileged enough to grow up with them. But Yaya would stand aside. She didn't have to eat. The pleasure she got was watching us eat. Whether it was keftedes or paidake, lamb chops, which she fried in butter. So in Egypt they had samna, just like the Indian cuisine. They used to boil bricks of butter and clarified butter, and then take off the water, and you had this clarified, jars of clarified butter, which everything was cooked in that for flavor. So that was Yaya Kalyopi.
And what was lovely about that is that it resonated so much with me, and I'm sure there are so many people in this room today who feel, oh wow, that was me with my yaya, and those are my children with their yaya. Because I know certainly that my children have uttered exactly that. In fact, they've stopped eating my food, they only want yaya's food now.
There we go.
But Costa, talk to us about the inception of this book. What inspired you, and was there a particular memory or moment that you thought about one day and said, I've got to put that down?
I'd sold Lemonia, and I think I've always loved writing because writing has been part of my career as a young lawyer, and obviously as a diplomat I used to write quite a lot. But after selling the restaurant, and I was sort of mulling over, these childhood memories come back, and that's why I've put the quote in the book by Graham Greene, that childhood is the credit balance of the writer. Όλες αυτές οι αναμνήσεις, those memories of childhood where I was a silent child, this very spoiled, indulged young pasha, young boy, with the three women competing to spoil me. My dad traveled a lot. He sort of ran away on Mondays. His job luckily allowed him to travel. He was a cotton trader, so he traveled to the north of the country. And sort of, I'd sit in the corner and you'd pick up, you absorb everything. These three women that had incredible lives. I mean, they were so, their tenacity, their resilience. They'd all suffered personal tragedies. But they were just able to get on with it. They didn't sort of dwell into victim mode. Maybe sometimes my mother, who's a character. They're all characters, really. So these three women who had endured, and of course the food, because the language of love was food. I mean, even my father, who would cook when he came home to relax, he would make sure, he would say, εγώ θα πάω στο κρεοπωλείο, στο χασάπι. He would go and buy the best cheeses, the best mangoes, the best food. The ladies could take care of the rest, but he would make sure the house was stocked with food. There were Italian delis that had opened later on. There were the Greek delis of Johannesburg, and Portas, Lagudis. And he would make sure the house was stocked. And that was their language of love. It was really food, how they showed their love. So I sort of took all this in. So I guess after being brought up this way, and then my father was a foodie, I mean, he would take us to great restaurants. I went to the old tavernas of Greece and great restaurants that Johannesburg had, of course, in the 70s and 80s. And of course, that sort of seeps into you. And then I just had this crazy idea, I need to, even when I was studying law, before I became a lawyer and a diplomat, I had this thing the bug in me. I want an old house somewhere, preferably at the sea, and I want to open up a taverna. Because that was just, I mean, food is in our DNA, Katie, isn't it?
Well,
all of us. I mean,
do not read this book on an empty stomach. I'll tell you that much. It makes you hungry. It makes you want to salivate and just eat constantly. You've got to be full as soon as you open it. So, Costa, the one thing that also made a striking impression on me from the outset, you're very clear. It was this triangle of chaos in our home. It was Yaya Kalyopi, it was your mom Betty, and it was Nonna Mary. And here you are in the middle. This young boy who is so indulged. At some point you're very honest and you say, I would have just been this little fat Greek boy, because constantly they are feeding and feeding him.
That happened later.
But tell us about this triangle of chaos, because it was not easy, especially for your mom living at home with them.
So my mom, different generation, and of course there were the differences about food. So my mom was a very adventurous eater. So she comes to South Africa and starts, her first job was at John Orr's. She loved the fashion. She spoke French. And of course, she's suddenly tasting cottage pie and bobotie and Cornish pies. But these were forbidden foods. I mean, you couldn't tell Yaya, if you brought a meat pie into the house, Yaya's blood pressure would... She didn't want to kill her mother-in-law by bringing in a meat pie from a cafe. You know what I mean? So you had these... So Mary was a little bit more open, Aunt Mary, my second mother, because she had married an Irish diplomat. So she had been in Moscow and Vienna and all over Europe. So she had catered to diplomatic functions. But, of course, Yaya was very much the traditional Greek cuisine. And my father, too. I mean, you couldn't make my father eat a shop-bought hamburger or a pie or make him eat sushi. He loved his grilled fish, ladolemon, or Greek way. And he was also very Arab in his way. So when we traveled on country trips, you're only allowed to eat a toasted cheese sandwich. I said, but it's a Greek cafe. He says, doesn't matter, only a toasted cheese sandwich. It's all you can. I said, can I have tomato? He said, you can have tomato.
But
So
tomato sauce was forbidden.
Tomato sauce and ketchup, HP sauce and all these sauces that my mother loved. And piccalilli, chutney, of course, the sweet stuff. I mean, how can you put sweet stuff on your food, you know, like mint sauce and mint jelly? And these three, the differences in those generations in the style of cooking and cuisine. So there was obviously that clash as well, where she was adventurous and they were quite traditional. And Mary was caught in the middle because she had to side with her mom, with Yaya, who was the elderly matriarch. So they made allowances for me because I had a very sensitive stomach. So they'd say, Titha faito pedissima. It was always, what little Kostaki going to eat? And he's got a sensitive stomach, so let's make him baton salé. Little salted sticks, tiropitakia, spanakopia, but with the short crust page, not the filo. So there was always endless debates and arguments about food in this kitchen. I thought it was funny, but obviously for my mother it was difficult.
And in fact, you use humor to really take us through those very, very intense moments. And you've come through as a writer, as someone who finds that balance and strikes it so beautifully of that pressurized situation, but then also you use humor around it. Was that intentional?
Yes, but I think in all my writing, even as a diplomat, I think whether you go through something trauma, some things obviously you can't use humor because they're quite serious issues. You know, if you mention the apartheid stories or the lady from the Holocaust in the first book from Thessaloniki. But the traumatic stuff that happened in your life, sometimes the pressure valve, the releasing the pressure is humor. So I find in all my writing, I think I need to put humor in. I think that's what entertains me, that's what amuses me, so that's what inspires me too. To take something quite deep sometimes, maybe layered and intricate, but bring in the humor. And that's the pressure release. And I think if I couldn't put humor into writing, I wouldn't be able to do it.
Because your mom didn't see the humor in this, from what I read. She couldn't see the humor. And there's one fabulous story. She makes a layered, she uses a bundt cake mold, and she makes layers of rice and peas and mincemeat in an effort to impress her mother-in-law and her sister-in-law. But of course, this was met with utter critique because it wasn't, I don't know, spanakopita, tirokpita, pastitsio, paputsakia, whatever the case is. And they critique her. And Aunt Maria, Nonna Maria says, but that mold is supposed to be for cakes. It is not for rice. And in a moment of absolute rage, Costa, your mother picks up this rice dish and smashes it against the kitchen cupboards.
I think she had just boiled over.
Well, let me tell you, did I cheer for her in that moment? I cheered for her. I thought, well, it's about time. They are driving you crazy.
She had reached the limits, I think, because normally she was quite phlegmatic. She'd sit in the corner, light her Dunhill, and everything was processed in that mind of hers. You know, she had the symbol of the Sphinx as her symbol of endurance, that had endured so much. So she'd sit there and think and nothing. I mean, she had incredible memory. And I think this book is also a tribute to her formidable, it's as much her book as it is mine, because it's all her memories. And of course, when Nonna was alive and Yaya. But certainly my mother never forgot. Even today, she doesn't need a shopping list. I need a shopping list. She's 86, and the mind is formidable. But she had the irony, the sarcasm, and she was a great mimic as well. So there were times when, you just listen to her talk and mimic all these people, but going through it this orthodoxy, this traditional conservatism, and sharing your home as a young wife, you know, and your husband's not there, was pretty difficult. My father he was in a difficult situation because he was 4 years old when his father died. In the streets of Cairo, he was hit by a car as he was stepping off a tram. So Yaya's 40 years old, Costa was 45, and she was crippled, struck by the fog of morning. She was incapacitated with 3 children. So Mary goes out in her teens to work as a seamstress, my dad's eldest. Yaya's the widow. My mother, an orphan from an affluent family in Minya, an orphan at about 14. So also has suffered loss. Suddenly your world view changes when the world becomes a much harsher, uncertain place. So they've all had to endure these hardships and losses. But my father's now caught in a situation, you can't put your mother in an old age home. And you can't put your sister that raised you and went out to work when you were 4. How can you not take her in? That was the right thing to do, but obviously very, very difficult for my mother while that triumvirate was in place.
Yes. Did she ever overcome that? I know eventually Yaya passes away, Aunt Maria moves out. Did your mother ever overcome and really retain control or regain her own space in her home?
Yes, she did. So she did, and she got she yearned to have a proper dining room, which we never had, because the dining room, which led onto the lounge, was with glass doors, became the transit lounge. It was a 4th bedroom where all the visiting relatives from Greece and Cyprus, because I'm a quarter Cypriot, they would come, immigrants, and where would they come? They would come to us, because we had the house in Kempton Park with a big stand, and everybody else, well, we started off in flatland in Twist Street. But eventually, she got her dining room, she got her kitchen back, she got her life back, and the two of them started spending a lot of quality time together. It came much later when I was then in high school. So eventually she did. But she never forgot, and those stories and those memories, those difficulties, I mean, she kept on, because she never forgot those. She processed them and spoke about them.
And her relationship with your father was also a very complex one. And it reveals itself. I won't tell you everything, but it does reveal itself at the end of the book, because you're thinking, goodness me, she's endured, he's endured. But it was a complex setup.
It was. And, you know, he was very Arab in his ways. He was a very charming man. He traveled a lot. I mean, so a story we just briefly mentioned before the talk. My mom didn't have wedding photographs in the house. So traditionally, you go into a Greek home and there's a row of Greek wedding photos. Sometimes they post the size of all these wedding photos. So we had wedding photos of her and my dad, but it was in an album, a beautiful white album, her wedding photos, and her in her polka dot dress, flare dress, dancing on this Italian ship on the way to South Africa. She didn't have wedding photos, but I did find a prized photograph, which was her pride and joy. So, and every photo tells a story. If we open up our old albums, those photos tell stories. So this is a photo of her in this Egyptian town of El Minya, which was a big cotton center of all the big cotton firms that were processing cotton, ginning cotton, and sending it to Alexandria for export to the United Kingdom. And this is now, Farouk has been deposed, the king. He's got onto the royal yacht in Alexandria, and off he goes to Monaco to continue his hedonistic lifestyle. The playboy king was a very cosmopolitan king, not a nationalist, but he gets deposed by the free officers movement of Gamal Abdel Nasser, Mohammed Naguib, and Anwar Sadat. So these 3 officers, the revolution has taken place, there's talk of nationalization, all the Greeks and Europeans are very worried, but they get on a train to visit all the towns along the Nile. So they come to El Minya. El Minya had a Greek club, sporting club, which was the center of their existence, with playing croquet, playing cards, you know, having bal masquer and having plays. And of course, all the businessmen of the head of the Ottoman Bank, the heads of the cotton firms and the Greek community is there to receive the officers who are on the train of destiny to meet people because now they're in power. Mohammed Naguib was the ruling officer at the time. So there's this photo of her. She gets chosen to lead the Greek dancing in traditional Greek costume. She dances, they play the Greek music. all the dignitaries are there, and she gets chosen to hand a bouquet of flowers to the leader of the group, Mohammed Naguib. Behind him is Gamal Abdel Nasser, and next to him Anwar Sadat. In that photograph, 3 presidents of Egypt. And that was on the mantelpiece. That was her special moment.
That's incredible.
Very special moment for her, not the wedding. That wasn't a great achievement. I think she cried, she cried before she got married, and she cried again after she got married.
I want to move on to something slightly more serious, and I want to read a little bit, because this was very moving. Now, you grew up, Costa, in a time at the height of apartheid, and there was a gardener who was a very good man, and one day your father asks Alfred, can he please come and collect you from school? So Alfred collects you on his bicycle. And the two of you are driving home, or riding home rather, and you're very happy to be on Alfred's bicycle, and you're stopped. The policemen walked towards us, bristling with primal pent-up aggression. It was telegraphed in their body language and the scowls on their faces. The sergeant ignored me and addressed Alfred in Afrikaans in an abrupt tone. I'm not going to repeat what it says, but the K word is there. Not once, but twice. Alfred took out his passbook, or Dompass, from the inside pocket of his blazer and handed it to the sergeant. The pass was the most hated symbol of apartheid. It controlled and restricted the movement of black people in urban areas. They had to carry the booklet with them at all times or face harassment and imprisonment. The policeman opened the booklet and gave it a cursory glance. Then he did something completely unexpected that terrified me. He spat in the book and flung it to the ground with a scornful look on his face. As Alfred bent to pick it up, the blonde constable punched him in the stomach with his huge ham-like fist. Alfred staggered from the blow and gasped with pain as he fell to his knees. The wind was knocked out of him. Then he collected himself. He stood up slowly, wincing, his nostrils flaring as he tried to draw air into his body. The sergeant had his hands on his hips and laughed with a mixture of glee and contempt. The constable was still not satisfied. He bent down and with his thick fingers quickly unscrewed the plastic cap on the bicycle's front tire valve. He pushed the valve in and deflated the front tire, then did the same with the back tire. I watched dumbstruck, immobilized with fear, even though they completely ignored me. Alfred never spoke about the policeman's attack. A few days later, when the weekend arrived, I saw Alfred again. He was back to his cheerful self, whistling and carrying on in the garden, as if nothing had happened. Kostaki, look, I've picked some apricots for you, he said. Now let's go and get some figs for Yaya. That's hard.
Yeah, it was a terrible incident. I was maybe 6 years old, and my dad and Alfred had an incredible friendship. I used to look at my dad's brogues, English brogues, the fish and chip shoes, and they swapped clothes. They liked clothes. He was a very dignified, tall, good-looking man, and a person my father trusted implicitly. So, and I remember his bicycle. It was a black, those thick tube BSA bicycles with the back brake, gleaming. Alfred was immaculate. His shoes were obviously beautifully polished. He wore far better shoes than any policeman. And he was just a dignified, wonderful human being. And almost, I guess, part of our family, coming to pick fruit. Yaya loved him, because we had a lot of fruit trees. We had chickens as well. We had a mulberry tree, the apricots, which they call mishmish in Egyptian, and quince. She'd make jam, kidoni. So she'd make quince jam from all these trees that we had. So this incident, you're 6 years old. You don't know much about racism, and although you're going to an all-white school, so there's a clue, but you don't experience the brutality of apartheid. That evil face, that was pure atrocity. It was just evil brutality, uncalled for. And unfortunately, that happened a lot in the 60s in South Africa. It was just the way the police operated in those days, with the notorious John Forster Square. There were those vans, you remember those big Ford vans with a steel cage at the back. And these guys in shorts, big burly guys, and it was just a terrible experience. But it was burnt into my memory, into the recesses. As young as I was, I never ever I did speak about it, and that's a situation. That's a childhood. I don't know if it's trauma, but I'll never forget it.
And does something like that go on and inform who you became as an adult? When you were practicing as a lawyer, when you went to the United Nations, was there any of that residue that you felt that still remained in your DNA somewhat?
It does remain in your DNA. It's a great question because it also ties into my father and their upbringing in Egypt, where they didn't see religion or color. It was a cosmopolitan place. And I don't want to use the word tolerance because tolerance is quite a weak word. There was absolute acceptance. My father would pray and say, Alhamdulillah. Then he'd go with his Jewish friends and put on a yarmulke and go to the shul. He'd go to the Greek church, but there he'd stand outside. He knew the priests, of course, the Greek priests, and they were friends of his, so he'd speak to them in inappropriate language. He was also a bit of an anarchist.
I was about to say, your father was a real character.
He was, certainly. Like my mother, so maybe the two of them found their match. So there was this, in Egypt, there was that certainly under Farouk, before nationalism came and maybe changed things. Farouk himself was a very cosmopolitan. He had French, you were saying earlier, Circassian French, Egyptian, Greek blood even, Italian. He loved Italians, Greeks, and so on. But Egypt was that kind of place where there wasn't religious hatred, there was acceptance. And my father would go to an Egyptian village and sit with the fellahin, with the peasant farmers. Some of them were very wealthy farmers on these rich banks of the Nile where those floods would come down and bring those rich soil where all the cotton fields were grown. And he'd go and sit. But there, of course, the men got served first. The men were served and they had to eat alone so that they're not disturbed. And he'd break sheets of pita and have full medames and eat with the Egyptian farmers sitting on the ground with him. He was one of them. So this kind of setup in South Africa, where you walk down the street and a black person would have to walk off the pavement, was strange. It was weird. Coming from Egypt, where all races, all colors, all religions just got on. So it was a shock to the system for them too.
So we've spoken a little bit about your mom. Let's talk about your dad, Stelio. Also a larger-than-life character, really very much present when he was home, and his absence was felt when he wasn't, because things become chaotic when Stelio's not home. Tell us a bit about that and how you then thought it best to write the story of your father in this book.
Yes, so when he was home and he'd played his wonderful music and he'd cooked la rosti father and he had opened his wines, he had also had his stories. And although he hadn't gone to university, he had gone to an agricultural college, he had a deep love for literature as well. And he had said to me, if you haven't read Dickens, you haven't read Dostoevsky, one of his favorite authors was the Nobel Prize-winning Naguib Mahfouz, who wrote the Cairo trilogy. I struggled reading that book. It was so dense and layered, almost like a Durrell book. A very, very, but he lapped it up. He's so much related to Naguib Mahfouz's book. I had to go back to it and to sort of get into it. So yes, when he was at home, he could be the life and soul of the party, very entertaining, also larger-than-life character, and an incredibly short temper. So if you'd say just the tone wrong and the plates would go crashing onto the floor, but he'd forget about it. He never held grudges. He'd never grown up with a father, so he had to go out and work quite young. But and he got on with everybody. Even with initially in our street, Venter Street, there was hostility from the Afrikaans neighbors. But then, of course, South Africa changed because in the 70s, immigrants started coming from all over the world. We had Atlas, we had the airport, we had Modderfontein. So we had all the immigrants coming with their skills from the UK and from Italy, from obviously the Portuguese colonies came later. So suddenly from being an exclusively Afrikaans street with these Greeks and this guy that looks Arab, we don't know if he's black, he's white, what's this fair woman doing with this guy? He looks a little bit too different. Suddenly we have all these immigrants living in the street. So that changed.
And there's a lovely part in the book where he actually plays with a policeman.
Yeah.
Because a policeman says to him, well, what are you? Are you Indian? Are you European? But he plays so beautifully with him, not confirming his race at all, which I really loved.
Yeah, I was in a car with him once. I think we had an accident outside Springs, and they came with this big Ford van, and this issue of racial classification, because he was dark man, a very good-looking man. He looked like Omar Sharif when he grew his moustache, and they were born the same year. So one year, I think in 1980, I was first year, before I went to Wits, he said, we're going to do a tour of Europe together. So we went to Rome, and in this one hotel in Rome, the waiters were all Egyptian. And they fussed over him. It's like, Omar, he was Zhivago, Omar Sharif was here. And he was so charming, speaking fluent Arabic with them. And that was the kind of guy he was. That's what the kind of man he was, you know. So caught in a very tricky triangle navigating this situation at home.
I liked his loyalty. There's something about your father who's loyal to your mother, but at the same time to his mother, to his sister, and very much to his children as well. And as you rightly say, kind of stuck. Talk to us about your sister. She's in the book, Ksenia Polikseni, named after her yaya, but she's not often mentioned. Is that intentionally so? You say how close you were and that you got even closer as time went by, but she's not a constant feature in the house. And at some point I was reading and I was going, where's the baby? What have they done with the child? I even found myself looking at the front page and I'm saying at the front cover. And I thought, where's Ksenia from the front cover?
So yeah, I've discussed it with Ksenia, and I mean, she's sort of, so with that photograph was in the 60s, early 60s.
There was no Ksenia.
There was no Ksenia.
Yes.
Ksenia came 6 years later, or 7 years later. So that's why, and the publishers liked this photo because it's the only photo I could find in these. In fact, Ksenia gave me a box. She says, have a look through these old photos. And lo and behold, there's the photo of the three matriarchs. One of the few photos where all three are together.
Yes.
Okay, in a peaceful moment.
Who's your mom and who's Nonna Mary?
My mom is the young lady kneeling here. Yaya, Calliope, and Aunt Mary kneeling with my first German Shepherd. And he was called Nasser after the Egyptian general. And you'll forgive me if you've heard this joke. And my dog Duke, who's a German Shepherd, rolls his eyes when I tell this joke. And it's one of my favorite jokes. I've always had a German dog because it's the only German that listens to a Greek. So.
And Nasser vanished one day.
Nasser vanished, and
Listen closely, Stella. You're going to like the story.
So Nasser disappeared. Well, he left. I was very attached to the dog, but I don't think we were good owners. We didn't know really how to raise a dog. I don't think, Mary had a dog, Peggy, back in Jerusalem before she married Jimmy, the Irish, the diplomat. But we didn't know what it's like. I mean, first home in the suburbs, suddenly you've got a German Shepherd dog. So the German Shepherd is a gift from my father's Jewish boss, and we call him Nasser, Egyptian nationalist leader. But this guy, Arnold Heim, he was a nice man. He was a lovely man. There was no issue. But Nasser was a reverse racist. He would bite all the Afrikaans men and young men that rode past on their bicycles. Of course, there were no black people in the street. You know, the siren would go off. It was very Afrikaans street. They rode past. They would tease him. The gate was always open. There was no wall. Nasser would go out and bite these people. And then, of course, they wanted to put him down. They wanted to get rid of him. So Nasser, eventually, my parents came up with a solution. I came home one day and he had been given to the police unit in Pretoria. And I was heartbroken. So ever since then, whenever I've been able to, I've had a German Shepherd in my life. And book number 3 is written by a German Shepherd.
You're not the only one. I have to share. We had a very similar experience growing up. Beautiful dog. Oscar was his name. Couldn't control his bladder. We arrive home one fine day, and old Stella, who's sitting over there, yes, Mommy, this is your story. She and my dad told us the dog was given to a police training school. To this day, my brother, sister, and I keep saying, where did the dog really go? I have been traumatized. That was trauma for us.
So you could relate to that?
No, I can absolutely relate to that. I can absolutely relate. I suppose it's a certain generation and how they did things. Do we have any questions or comments for Costa? Any thoughts? Please feel free. I could go on and on having this conversation forever. But if there are any audience members who want to have and ask something, hello. I will walk around with my microphone.
Did Alfred ever tell your dad what happened?
Sorry, who?
Is it Albert or Alfred?
Alfred.
Alfred, did he ever tell your dad what happened?
Yes, I mean, I told Yaya, and she said that they're despicable people. They're just evil, unevolved people. So Yaya knew, and my dad knew, sure. I mean, but they were close as ever, so they shared So yes, my dad knew, of course, he did know that, yeah.
And he couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah, what could you, I mean, he couldn't do anything. I mean, who do you complain to? It's apartheid regime. I mean, John Foster was the prime minister, who was strangely enough quite liked in the African countries, but he used to be questioned by journalists, Katie, and he would say, this is the happiest police state in the world. Happy for who?
Do you choose your title and write your book, or do you write the book and then I find the title quite, quite
interesting. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that.
And,
interesting question.
We don't work backwards. I mean,
it works in very different ways. It's so many different ways. It's an interesting question. So when you start a book, you get a working title, and you go with that, but you have alternative titles. You write down quite a few titles, and then obviously when you submit it to your publisher, there's a publishing team. And they even consult, I didn't know this, they even consult the booksellers. They go to exclusive books and they say, listen, what do you think? Even the photograph, if you look at that photograph, there was another photograph that the publisher, Melinda Ferguson, who's part of NB, there was one of me and my dad. He's in a suit, and it's me in my navy blue and white cardigan outside Ayo Costandino in Eleni, our Orthodox church. And she loved this photo. And she wanted that photo. But he's looking at me in a certain way, and the booksellers and people that aren't Greek picked up on the evil eye. And they said, is this something weird going on here, the way he's looking at his son? And I mean, it's strange, but I mean, if you think about it, the evil eye is in the top, in the title, and they're saying this photograph of the father looking, the father's eyes are obviously full of love, but when you see evil eye, you might imagine something different. And then I'm glad we chose that photograph even because of the three matriarchs. In Greek Taverna, I didn't want that cover. It was a very Mykonos touristy blue and white sort of what I would say is kitsch. And if you took that cover to Greece, they would say to you, "Αυτό δεν θα δουλέψει στην Ελλάδα." That won't work in Greece. We want something more cerebral in Greece. South Africa, though, it popped. The booksellers loved it. The public loved it. It was like my big fat Greek wedding. You know, Greeks were very critical. But Nia Vardalos was a sensation all over the world. So the title, to go back to your question about the title, I had originally come up with the working title of Kiss the Bread. Because, bread was holy. We never threw bread away. If it fell on the ground, you had to kiss the bread and κάνεις το σταυρό σου. And that was my working title. When the publishing team looked at it, they don't understand the Kiss the Bread tradition. But Michelle Magwood, who's a brilliant literary critic and editor, who read the first manuscript and wrote a very good reader's report for Random House Penguin at the time, came up with the title Matriarchs, Meze and the Evil Eye, because that really captures what the book is about. There are sections about, so much about Meze, so much about the superstition in the glossophagia and the evil eye. As you can see, the eye is here, and on my, I didn't bring garlic today. I think garlic's in the kitchen. Yes. Didn't put garlic in my cubbyhole. And there's no evil eye here today. There's a good eye. Anyway, so they came up with, they loved the title. They thought, and they came up with that photo. So it is kind of a team decision. You come up with some alternatives, and then the team decides.
Have you been back? Because you
yes.
depicted it so well.
Yes.
And I'm of a young, slightly older generation than you, and I frequently go there. And you've portrayed it extremely well.
Thank you.
We had a Combaro, the Franciscos family,
yes,
who were also in cotton. And it's brought back a lot of memories. It truly has. But Nagut Mahfouz was an amazing man. And I'd like, you've sort of got things triggering in my mind. And I look forward to reading your books. Bless you, and to continued success.
Thank you so much. I will thank you. Thanks for that. That's wonderful. I think food just unifies. Whether I was a diplomat or in the restaurant, obviously serving people. I mean, it's like bringing them into your home, and then of course in our kitchen. It is a language, a universal language, and I think food and appreciation of other cultures and heritage, it just unifies us. And at the end of the day, I hope that in my books, although it's our Greek heritage, Greek heritage and South African, sort of Greek South Africans of the diaspora, and of course the Egyptian flavors. I like to celebrate our common humanity in our books. But thank you, I will go back, and I have a reason to go back, and I thank you for that because I didn't know it. I will go to the restaurant, and I was in Alexandria, Grand Bazaar in Cairo. I've only been back to Alexandria, and I went back to see the Greek schools and the Greek neighborhood, those beautiful neoclassical buildings, the Greek section of the cemetery, and the Greek nautical club with the beautiful gleaming skulls, the rowing boats, and the old Greek patisserie that are still there, some of them owned by Egyptians, but from 250,000 Greeks, there are about 2,500 that are left. But the buildings are still there. So, is it, thank you, 1,740, thank you. So, I was telling Katie earlier that in the writing of this book, it was a much both books were double the size. They were about 600-page books, and you just can't, unless you're a top name, you can't really, not when you start out. They have to be short, easy, quick reads. So I cut out quite a lot about Egypt. So I do want to go back and write a fourth book about Egypt, about the Playboy King Farouk, about the Greeks of Egypt. So I'd like to go back, God willing, to the Library of Alexandria, the new one, which wasn't there on the Corniche when I visited. But I did visit the palace and the harem in Montaza, opposite the Sheraton, where Farouk had his, his palaces in these beautiful grounds. So I have to go back now for, obviously, to research the fourth book. I would love to go to Naguib's. I bought a copy of one of his books, the Cairo Trilogy, in New York. And before my father died, it was signed by Naguib Mahfouz. And I gave it to my dad, and it was one of his prized possessions that it was signed by. And my mom has something signed by Kavafi. She has some of his poems, which I've asked her to find it because it's a museum piece. Some of his poems, like Ithaiki and all the others, signed by the great man. So
you heard it here first. We brought you breaking news. There's a third and a fourth book in the works. I'm going to leave you with this and tell me what you think. And Costa, thank goodness we've eaten. She made revithokeftedes and kolokithokeftedes, chickpea and courgette fritters. We ate melinzanes and kolokithakia, aubergine and courgette slices immersed in a batter of beaten eggs and ice-cold beer, then dusted with seasoned flour and deep-fried until golden and crispy. We dunked the crispy strips into a strong scordaglia, a dip made of garlic, olive oil, and pureed tomato. A potato, my God, that's sacrilege. You can't put tomato in scordaglia, my word. She baked melinzanes paputsaikia, little aubergine shoes. She halved whole aubergines lengthwise and coated them with olive oil. She scooped out the flesh and mixed it with chopped onion, minced garlic, and fresh homemade tomato sauce. When we were not fasting, she baked the same paputsaikia, but with a more substantial mincemeat filling, topped with a bechamel sauce and a grated feta or kefalotiri crust. And so it goes on and on and on. The stories about food in the book are just incredible. Has it made you a good cook?
So, yeah, well, Christine, am I a good cook? Christine will vouch for that. So, interesting.
So who does all the cooking at home?
I do.
All the cooking?
Most of it.
What was for supper last night?
We had pizza. I have to be, I like pizza on a Friday. It's my day off. No, but interesting, when we had Lemonia, Christine was in the kitchen, and I was in the front sort of calling. Sometimes I'd only go into a kitchen on a Sunday because it was mayhem on a Sunday, because everybody in Cape Town would arrive. We'd stagger our bookings, but they'd all come at the same time, and it was just slips. So those of you that have restaurants, trying to get all the plates out was absolute nightmare. So I didn't cook in those days, but I could. We had trained everybody if I needed to fill in and go and fry kolokithakia and go and make a sauce or something. In a restaurant, you have to do everything, from checking the toilets to running the bar to making the coffee. If you're not prepared to be like an octopus and have your tentacles, you have to be. But I didn't do most of the cooking and the prep. Christine did that with a great team in the kitchen. But when we sold the restaurant, suddenly I started cooking. So that's when I really got involved in and trying different cuisines, because I got a bit tired of Greek lamb. You know, and everybody comes to you and says, oh, Greek lamb, Greek lamb. I want Japanese food, Asian food. I mean, I don't know what Yaya would have to say about it. I'm sure she'll forgive me, but I certainly love Asian and Japanese food.
What is the one meal, in closing, Costa, that takes you back to this time in your life, where you eat it or smell it and the aromas just take you back to that kitchen in Kempton Park?
Yeah, I think that's an easy one. You come home from school, and there's piping hot keftedes, tiganites, keftedake και πατάτες tiganites ελαιόλαδο, and sometimes paidakya, arnisia, lamb chops fried in samna in butter. You walk into the kitchen and you smell that and you've come home and it's heaven.
Well, that's the smell of home for Costa. Give him a huge round of applause. Costa, we have one more question. I don't want to deny the question.
We've spoken a lot about food in this book, but for me, I've had the privilege of reading it. There's so very many layers to it. One is the architecture, because you describe the cafe society and the beautiful buildings in Cairo. Then you talk about now Mary's visit to Russia, and you can just see the difference in colours, the styles. And then you move to a flat, very stark in Twist Street, and you end up in Kempton Park in a yellow-faced brick building.
I think what you've triggered there is something I'd like to just add, if I may, Katie, is you take these three women. So Yaya leaves from her native Crete as a very young teenager to go to Egypt because Crete was still not independent from the Turks when she was born. It only became, and then the opportunities were in Egypt. It was the center of Hellenism outside Smyrna before the terrible tragedy in Smyrna in 22. So Mary goes from working to a diplomat's wife to then suddenly being separated and divorced and working as an admin clerk in accounts. What a transition. My mother goes from being in an affluent family with a mom and dad. Her mom dies young, then her father, suddenly an orphan, raised with tough love by her aunts and the matriarch, Polixeni, who had the bakery in Egypt, in Minya. So the transition between these women, how they navigated from being a widow, suddenly alone, Mary, and how they dealt with that. Sorry, you were tying it up to,
The architecture and the way you describe things, it's extremely vivid and evocative.
Yeah, so you sort of, you traverse, you don't know the spread going from, describing Egypt to describing Kempton Park. So they go from a cosmopolitan place, and where do they land up? In Kempton Park in a yellow brick house. Some of the houses up the road had outside toilets. They had a bathroom inside. Oh, we had an inside bathroom, thank God. But some of the houses, and there was an Indian family up the road that had their land from Paul Kruger. They held on to their land, still there today, with a cow pasture and their clothing business. So it was quite a shock for them, to come from a cosmopolitan Egypt. And all those transitions, if you think about it, the resilience to make those changes and adapt to your new environment.
Clearly, you have a huge talent for writing. The man who was a lawyer, a diplomat, a restaurateur, and now an author. Give him a huge round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really, really wish you the very, very best. Tell us quickly, give us another breaking news scoop, please. When is book 3 out?
So Duke is furiously writing book 3. His observations of a clever dog. He's completely personified. He's human in every way. He just doesn't speak. So it's almost done. Just polishing. It's slightly about 220 pages, almost there. There might
so
be
we'll
some
be back next year, and
hopefully, God willing, if the publishers like it, it's a completely different book. We're done with families. We're done with memoirs, and whatever we haven't said, we've swept under the carpet. So Duke's book is almost ready to go. We must just see who wants to publish it, and we'll take it from there. But I think for dog lovers and animal lovers, there's a deep philosophy, because he's my teacher. It's his prayer. There's rules of a dog's life, And there's also idioms about dogs. You know, we use all these idioms like black dog or this dog. Negative, and he's like a canine advocate where he defends the rights of dogs against these words and quite disparaging terms that we use against dogs. So we're there to champion the cause of dogs.
That sounds wonderful, and we wish you the very, very best with that.
Katy, thank you. Firstly, Katy, thank you so much. It's been wonderful chatting with you. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, from a fellow author and an accomplished journalist. Thank you to you for being here. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful for the support. It's really heartwarming. The goodwill and support has been wonderful. Thank you to the booksellers from Exclusive Books for being here today, to Ria and her team for the wonderful Meze that we had, and last but not least, a fantastic event, Anthea and Dina. I thank you so much for keeping the flame alive of Greek culture, Greek heritage. It's wonderful what you're doing. Thank you for inviting me and putting me and Katy together. It's really been a standout event for me. Thank you so much.
Huge round of applause for the new author in our community.